Ready? Ready? All right, we're about to start. I want to thank you all for coming back, and good afternoon. I hope you had a nice lunch and are ready to get back into elections. I equate this panel similar to, and I hate saying this because I'm in Philadelphia, but preparing for the Super Bowl, as in during the preseason, you're not thinking, hey, I'm going to be at the Super Bowl. You're thinking, how do I prepare for the Super Bowl? And so Election Day is election officials' Super Bowl. So this is what I equate this panel to. So I'm pleased to serve as moderator for our third panel today, which is focused on data related to the election day itself. Data-savvy election officials across the country are leveraging a number of tools to strengthen specific aspects of voting operations. Tools such as mail-in ballot tracking systems, electronic poll books, line management tools are not only improving the voting experiences, but they are also generating invaluable data that can be used to inform decision-making in real time during voting and in post-election period. Civic groups, political parties, and candidates who work to register voters and mobilize them on Election Day are also constantly innovating and honing their data-driven strategies. The tools used by these election stakeholders rely heavily on voter registration and turnout data generated by election officials. We will focus these and related topics during our panel today. Three of our expert panelists of today currently serve as local election officials in Colorado, Indiana, and Virginia. We're also pleased to have with us a representative from the data-driven civic group here in Pennsylvania. Each of them brings a wealth of knowledge and experience from across the country to our discussion today about how data is used to improve our elections and support voter participation. On my far right, Amber McReynolds is the Director of Elections for the City of Denver, Colorado. She has administered elections in Denver for 12 years and has worked in the public policy and administration area for over 16 years. Denver's election division has earned the recognition for a number of its innovations under Amber's leadership, including the ballot trace program, which she will be speaking about today. Ray Murphy, who I don't know, so hello, nice to meet you, is the Deputy Director at Pennsylvania Voice, where he manages partner relationships, coordinating the Keystone Votes election security and modernization campaign, and helps the 501c3s in Pennsylvania build stronger civic engagement programs. Before coming to Pennsylvania Vote, he served as the Director of grant making at Bread and Roses Community Fund. To my left is Michelle White, is the General Registrar for Prince William County, Virginia. She has 14 years of experience in the field of elections administration, including 11 years as the Director of Elections in both Prince William and Culpeper counties in my home state of Virginia. And last but not least is Laura Herzog, is the Election Supervisor for Hendricks County, Indiana, where she has served for 24 years. Laura is also a member of Governor Eric Holcomb's Executive Council on Cybersecurity, which is chaired by Secretary of State Connie Lawson. As with the previous panels, each of the panelists will give prepared remarks, and then we'll shift into a question and answer period. And again, during the question and answer period for you, we ask that you identify yourself, speak into the mic, and most importantly, what? There we go. There we go. All right, we'll start with Amber.
Okay, well, it's great to be here, and I was participated in one of the Election Assistance Commission's data summits a few years ago, and so I just find these to be extremely valuable to talk about very critical issues facing election officials and really have good discussions and talks about how to best improve that. So in Denver, and this is my 13th year in Denver, 7th as Director of Elections, I came to this with background actually in data analytics and what have you during my graduate program, and so the analysis of data, what it can do in terms of policy making, continuous improvement, process improvement, all of that is something that I had a great understanding of coming to the job. And when I started in Denver, there was very little of anything with regards to data management, innovation, data analytics in any way. So we've spent a great deal of time building that up, and so much so that we use it to improve our processes. We've used it to advocate for significant changes in Colorado's law. In fact, we were sort of the driving county, and I helped write a lot of the legislation that we passed in 2013 that provided for ballot delivery, vote centers, same-day registration, and sort of all the innovative policy reforms that we now have. So data is powerful, and that has that I know very well from my experience in Denver, but also prior to that. So I put this up, Electionopoly, and if you see on this slide, there's a gerrymandered boardwalk, there's provisional tax, which are for provisional ballots, there's the community chest with campaign finance. But the point of it that I always try to illustrate is with elections, there's tremendous games that can get played with processes or policies or even just inconsistencies and difficulties that often occur for voters. So we've really tried to make the rules of engagement clear, advocate for policies that make more sense for voters and that better serve them in a more effective way. And one of the other things I've got a couple quotes in the slide deck about data. And this one I like. It's Jennifer. She is the founder and executive director of Code for America. And our ability to do great things with data will truly make a difference in the lives of and in our world. And sorry, I think some of it's cut off there, but that's a little formatting thing. And so so given that and kind of changing the world and making things better in this environment, which is the elections world, for me this started at a young age. And there's many things going on in this picture, but the one that sort of makes me laugh, and my parents laugh at this picture every time they see it, is that I was probably strolling around thinking about doing a couple different things in this photo, but then also thinking about whatever I was going to do the next day or whatever I was going to do beyond that and what have you. So that's kind of, I think it's sort of indicative of how I see a lot of this stuff in elections, and that trying to always look for improvements, ways to get better, and what have you. So our approach, and I'm going to talk about ballot trace and sort of how it supports our ballot delivery model. But the reason that we developed ballot trace and why this matters so much is we now in Colorado have a ballot delivery system. We had permanent vote by mail at great high numbers, almost 80% across the state by 2012, and that was voters opting in to get their ballot by mail, so they were choosing that method. And what we found with a ballot delivery model, or some states call it vote by mail, vote at home, any of these reforms, they need systems to support them so that voters know what's going on with their mail ballot. And so we developed ballot trace. And what our goals were to enhance the customer experience, proactively communicate to voters, create operational efficiencies that would save money, and then increase the transparency and accountability for how mail ballots are delivered through the post office. Because if you're an election official, you know that if you send out a vote by mail ballot and you don't have ballot trace or you don't have a system, you dropped it at the post office, and the next time you see it is back at your door again, hopefully by election day, and there's no accountability in there in between. So we've basically solved that problem with ballot trace. So here's a slide that shows the impact of ballot trace and why it has been so significant for us. So 2008, and this was back when we had polling places, early voting, and vote by mail, and that we had permanent vote by mail at that time. We had 1 in 5 voters that participated in that election had to call us to ask us a question about vote by mail, registration, polling places, whatever it was. And it was a huge phone bank, 50+ people had to answer these calls for weeks prior to the election. significant number of people had to call us. And that is just ridiculous that anyone would have to reach out to their election official to get this information. So after that election, we said, all right, let's analyze all of this call volume and data and why people called us. Specifically, what were they asking for? And what rose to the top, and it was because we had permanent vote by mail had increased, was most of the calls, our top call driver, had to do with mail ballots. Am I on the list? When are you sending it to me? Why didn't I get it yet? Where is it? Where did the carrier give it to somebody else? And then on the back end, did you guys receive it? Because it's election day and I'm worried and I want to make sure you received it. So we said, okay, we're going to develop a data system to address this and then proactively push out the information. So we created Ballot Trace in 2009, pioneered, designed everything in our office, started rolling it out, and then by 2012, 1 in 15 voters called us instead of 1 in 5. So we saw a tremendous improvement just in a 2.5-year period from when Ballot Trace was implemented, and we didn't even have that many people on the list yet. So then we implemented our new law sort of in the middle of this slide. So 2013 is when ballot delivery to all voters came in. And we fast forward to 2016, we served 100,000 more people in 2016 than we did in 2008, and our call volume was down 95%. And most of it is this Ballot Trace system. So now we're at 1 in 37 voters that called us, which is great. Our primary, which was June 26th, we were at 1 in 60 voters calling our office to get information. So our call volume now is down probably 96% from what it was in 2008. So this is the operational efficiency and the cost. We don't even have to hire significant numbers of people to run the phone bank anymore because we've basically just pushed the information to voters. And then this is sort of how it grew. So in 2014, we had about 15,000 users on it. Now, as of today, we have 45% of our voters that are on Ballot Trace. So almost half of the voters that vote in the City and County of Denver, we push them a text message or an email saying your ballot's been printed and it's gone to the post office, now it's out for delivery to you, and then all the way back again, they get a confirmation that we've accepted the signature and it's been counted. We also notify them if their ballot is undeliverable. We say, hey, it's undeliverable, click here and update your address or call us and we'll advise you where to go. We also use it as a tool to remind them about the election. So a week out, we say, hey, you haven't returned your ballot yet, don't mail it anymore, make sure you drop it off. And then we do it 5 days out, and then we do it the day before the election, then we do it on election morning. Anybody who has not submitted their mail ballot, we send them a reminder via text. And this is all through the system, so this is literally no work by any staff member, but we're doing all of these proactive communications. And this is some of the results. So this is from 2016, and we're in the process now of analyzing this again. But the power of Ballot Trace has an administrative and an operational component for us. It has a customer service benefit to the voters, and we now have determined it is a turnout driver as well. So voters that are on Ballot Trace have a 2-point higher rate in turnout than voters not, and they have a 7% higher rate of their mail ballot being accepted. And why is that? Well, because we notify them if they've got a signature issue or they're undeliverable or any of those things. So voters are having a better experience with voting because of a system that is customer service based but also drives operational efficiencies. So we've made this part of our strategic marketing. We're constantly encouraging voters to sign up. Even if they have already received their mail ballot, we still want them to sign up, even if they're getting that mail ballot envelope and we've already gotten it out to them. We still want them to sign up so that they get the confirmation that their ballot's been counted on the back end. So we continually push that message out. And this is a little hard to see, but I just wanted to show one of the dashboards that we have in the system. So customer service, kind of turnout driver, communication for voters, but administratively, when we go drop our ballots off at the post office, we know by the next morning, by precinct, by zip code, by ballot style across the city, the success rate of scanning that the post office has processed. So we didn't know any of that prior. It was a black hole. You drop them off, and then we see them later. Now we know, literally down to the precinct, probably even routing code for the post office, what the delivery success rate has been. And so if we see anything that is lower than what we would expect to see by that next morning, we're on the phone with the post office and saying, hey, where are these things? Why aren't these done yet? And at first the post office didn't like this system so much, but now they do, because it's also increased confidence in their services for voters. So this is one of the dashboards, and we have plenty of reports. We do GIS work to kind of analyze delivery rates across the city and all of that as well. And so here's the final quote, MIT scientist. Charles already gave his own quotes earlier on his panel, so I didn't have to put him in the slide, but did Andrew McAfee up here. So the world is one big data problem. And I think, and I'll insert elections in front of world, but the elections world is a big data problem, and I think this is a good example of how we can build systems that better support voters, create operational efficiencies, and just make the overall experience better for all of those that participate in this process. So.
That's really cool.
Yep, you're next. We're going to go.
Great. So again, I'm Ray Murphy, and I'm with Pennsylvania Voice. And the purpose of my talk today is really twofold. One is to let you all know what's going on in the world of civic engagement from the perspective of organizations that try to mobilize voters, how we use the data that you produce through the state voter files that are available to all of us. But the second aspect of what I want to deliver on today is the fact that this data allows you just as many options as we who are out on the ground trying to engage voters. This data offers you just as many opportunities to be targeted and specific in the way that you communicate with voters, and hopefully save you time and money in getting out messages that you need to deliver to voters. But quickly, before I dive into all that, I just want to talk about Pennsylvania Voice for a second. We are a nonpartisan statewide coalition of organizations that's devoted to increasing voter participation, especially from some of the organizations that are the least likely right now to participate. And so that means that we literally coordinate the activities of organizations in the state that run voter registration drives on street corners with paper, and we are now running as much voter registration in Pennsylvania as we can on tablets, because thanks to the Department of State and the leadership of many election officials here in Pennsylvania, we have the most sophisticated online voter registration system in the country right now, which allows third-party organizations to set up their own accounts that allow them to collect data about registrants, but also automatically transmit it to the Department of State. In addition, our coalition recognizes that all of the work that you do, registering voters and turning them out to the polls and educating them about the civic engagement process, which we do in about 18 counties across our state, all of that work is meaningless if at the end of the day there are difficulties accessing the ballot itself. And then also we recognize that if the way that our legislative maps in any given state and our state are drawn don't accurately reflect the kinds of communities that people live in, then they're not able to elect people who actually represent them. So that's our overall mission. And we are a part of a network called the State Voices Network, and I name that because we have similar partnerships in about 25 states throughout the country, and up here is a list of some of those states for those of you who might want to check out, who my counterparts are where you live. And even beyond those states, we offer access to a sophisticated data file that includes information from state voter files enhanced with all kinds of other things that allows folks to use data in a really sophisticated way to reach out to voters. All of our network shares the goal of fixing fair representation, ballot access, civic participation, and we also do work to strengthen the organizations that serve our communities. And so one thing that comes up a lot, and I hear from our visionary and lovely election directors in Pennsylvania, is that a lot of voters don't seem to know the basics of the system, and one of our jobs is to try to educate them so that that burden isn't solely on government, but that folks who are being motivated to vote come in with some knowledge of what the rules are and what the process is. Similarly, we are really in the midst of a multi-year campaign right now to modernize Pennsylvania's election laws. Pennsylvania is one of only 9 states in the entire country that doesn't offer any of the basic voting opportunities that have become standard in so many other states. So not only do we not have no excuse absentee voting, we don't have any form of early voting or same-day registration, pre-registration for youth, automatic voter registration. Any of the things that are being talked about in other states are not available here. Unfortunately, as I think we all know in the current climate, conversations about modernization of our election systems are taking a back seat somewhat to security. including real and perceived threats. And so for us, one of our most critical jobs in the next 2 years is to work very closely with election directors in the Department of State to secure all of the funding that is needed to build secure and modern voting systems. And so that includes new voting systems, but also state voter file databases, as well as things like electronic poll books, which improve efficiency of election operations. So that's where we're at right now, and that's our big fight. But I'm going to talk now for a second about what we do in the context of data. So we think of data as a means for more sophisticated communication. It allows trusted messengers to find and talk to exactly the communities with whom they have the most currency, with whom their message is the most listened to. We also use data to identify prospective volunteers and supporters for some of the door-to-door work that we do, encouraging people to vote, some of the phone banking that our partners engage in. We also use data to identify areas of different counties where the voter registration need is the highest. Typically, most civic engagement programs do not do door-to-door programs to register voters. It's typically too inefficient. But what they do is find public spaces where there's likely to be a large propensity of unregistered voters. Or in the case of a state like Pennsylvania, which doesn't have a very fast-growing population, often the work that we're doing is about re-registering voters, especially lower-income voters who tend to move a lot and constantly need their registration status to be updated in order to be on the poll book at the polling place that's the closest to them. We also know from a lot of research that there's a significant number of voters who just don't vote without a reminder. They just don't vote unless someone asks them to. And our organizations that belong to our partnership are effective at making those kinds of reminders. For us, data removes some of the guesswork. There was a time when, at least in the grassroots organizing world, you just ended up going to every door, or you stood on every corner, or you put flyers through someone's mailbox. Data takes a lot of that guesswork out of the picture so that you are able to much more clearly hone in on the people who most need to hear from you. There is a very specific set of tools that we use and that we offer to partner organizations. And so when you're dealing with voter registration campaigns or other civic engagement entities, and that these standards and these practices are also typically the things that those on the partisan side of the line do as well. So these are similar, their names may be a little bit different, but the concepts are similar. We start with something that we call the civic engagement file, and that starts very simply with the voter file in a given state. But then you take that file, and we work with a data vendor who enhances it and overlays on top of that data file consumer demographic information that's either publicly available or publicly available for purchase, and it adds things to the file that let you know a little bit more about who the voter is. It can give you a more up-to-date address. It can standardize the way that phone numbers and other pieces of data are used. We also overlay on top of those records census data. So you're able to identify an individual voter who lives in a particular census tract is likely to have X median income, or likely to have this ethnicity, or is likely to be a homeowner or not. And then last, data scientists and other mathematicians create models that go even further. They're algorithms, essentially, that take a whole bunch of these data factors and that are then able to predict a specific behavior or inclination that that voter is likely to have. So that can include likelihood to vote in an upcoming election. For the partners that we work with on the nonpartisan civic engagement front, when we do get out the vote work, we exclusively focus on voters who have a 30 to 70% propensity to vote. Typically, partisan campaigns focus on individuals with higher propensity to vote, and that's why they're typically doing more persuasion work, because they already know someone's going to vote. Their job is to try to figure out, just to push a particular candidate. Our job is to try to find the folks who are just unlikely to vote or participate in the process at all and give them the information that they need to be able to participate. These models also predict things like race and ethnicity. We apply our own model to the voter file to predict what we think is dead wood. The state and counties are bound by very clear laws about who can be removed from the rolls for legal processes, and that's important. But for our purposes, we want to make some guesses about who's likely not really a live voter because they just haven't gotten to the point where they've been removed from the lists. And then models also allow us to predict where a particular individual might stand on any set of issues. So for our organization, some of which are focused on environmental rights, or some might be focused on say, criminal justice reform, or another might be focused on, raising the minimum wage or something like that. These models allow our partners to find the people who are most likely to resonate with the work that that organization does. Over time, that allows an organization to build a relationship with a voter, and that relationship, we think, can ultimately lead to creating more lifelong voters rather than folks who are only intermittently involved. I think I covered many of these things already, but we typically use this data to either predict individuals who need to be engaged around a particular election, individuals who live in an area where there's a high voter registration need or where there's issue advocacy. And I go through this level of detail to some extent, not just to let you know what we're doing on the other side of the work that we're all collectively engaged in, which is making sure that people are able to participate in the democratic process, but some of the things that I'm saying can serve as models for election directors and states and others who want to have a little bit of help being more specific in their outreach. So, for instance, when you look, there are a number of issues that come up frequently, right? There are polling place changes. There are new laws that come down that needs to be communicated to voters. For instance, like first-time voter ID laws or something like that. There's any variety of things that happen that there's some obligation on the part of a county or an election or a state election department to communicate to voters, but these kinds of data tools allow you to be more specific in your outreach. What specifically that could look like, we, for instance, actually have contracts with data and software vendors who literally make it their job to provide these kinds of tools. Those kinds of contracts and vendors are open to you all as well. There are also vendors for one-time programmatic use. So you can call a data vendor and say, I need to do a telephone town hall tonight to everybody who lives in X precinct to explain to them the changes in polling place location this cycle. And then, of course, the reality is you all in states and counties create the data sets that we work with. In my experience, at least in Pennsylvania, there's been challenges actually looking at that data usefully because there isn't necessarily the software on hand to make it easy to parse that. But you do actually have much of the same information that we then ultimately enhance and use in different ways. So again, the purpose of this conversation is just to remind you that there are a lot of options for how one can use data in a variety of ways that really address day-to-day concerns. And I think with that, if you have questions or want to talk more about what options might be available to you in terms of this kind of data targeting, I'd be happy to talk after the session. Thanks.
Well, we'll have questions and answers a little bit later. So next, Laura.
Okay. Do I have to click anything, or does it just come up?
No, they'll put it up.
Oh,
There you go.
there it is. Okay.
And then this will be forward, and that's back.
Okay, thanks. It's my first time. My name is Laura Herzog, and I'm from Hendricks County, Indiana. Our county is one county west of Marion County, which is where Indianapolis is. We have approximately 111,000 registered voters now. We are the second fastest growing county in Indiana right now, so it's critical for us to keep on top of gathering data to keep things as efficient as possible for our voters. So I feel amongst friends, I want to share this with you. This is my first time in Philadelphia, so I had two goals. One is to get a real Philly cheese, whatever, steak and cheese, yeah. And the other was to see the Liberty Bell. So I thought when Vice Chair Christy McCormick earlier talked about election administrators having a touch of OCD, that's true. I did make it to the Liberty Bell, and it still has a big crack in it. And I thought, haven't they all heard of Flex Seal or J.B. Weld? But anyway, I'm enjoying my stay here, and I'm here to specifically talk about electronic poll books. And I do want to let you know that our county went from precinct-based voting to a full vote center transition just this last primary, which was May 8th. Before we had 104 precinct-based polling sites. We went down to 26 vote centers, reduced our poll worker force from 520 down to, I want to say, a little over 100. So it's hard to talk about electronic poll books without talking about vote centers. They go a little bit hand in hand. Peanut butter and jelly, biscuits and gravy. You're going to go crazy now. Sonny and Cher. Okay, in Indiana, as of April 6th, there are 60 of 92 counties that are using electronic poll books. 35 of those are vote center counties like mine. 25 are non-vote center counties. Like I said, our first election using this was just last May. Currently, we have 4 e-poll book vendors that are certified in the state of Indiana. And if I could talk a little bit about that, there we go. Indiana is very aggressive, thankfully, on their e-poll book certification. Each vendor and county must go through a really thorough acceptance testing program that counties and vendors must comply with before using in an election. Certain specifications are met to ensure correct functionality, and we also are fortunate enough to have an organization called VSTOP, which is a voting system technical oversight program. They are out of Ball State University. A quick background for us, in Indiana, we do have a photo ID law. So on our electronic poll books, which are iPads, the voter must show their photo ID. Typically, it's an Indiana-issued driver's license, which makes the check-in process extremely quick and efficient. A barcode is on the back of the license. The iPad camera will access the barcode. An electronic keypad comes up for the voter. They sign it. They're issued a ballot ticket, which then goes to the voting machine. It's an extremely quick check-in process, where before with the bulky poll books, a lot of times it would take a long time for the poll workers to find the right letter of the alphabet, or the MCs in the beginning of the M's, or are they after the B's? Then you have the father that's signed on the son's line. So all those efficiencies have improved. We can monitor in real time on election day lines. I'll have a few screenshots here for you. Functionality of the electronic poll books. Do they have full connectivity? Are their printers synced? Are they at the proper charge level? Location activity is extremely important and helpful to us. We can communicate directly with the poll workers through the electronic poll books. Certain things like, hey, if you have a little downtime, don't forget to sign all of these forms that need signed, that sort of thing. And of course, we can monitor turnout in real time. This is a really cool slide. This is our dashboard. You can see on the left, those are all little subtitles that you can open up and expand, but this slide in particular kind of gives you a really nice view of what's going on. It shows you, obviously, that your polling places are 100%. You can see how many have voted absentee, how many have checked in, what your percentage is. Ignore the 70 critical iPads because this was taken just last week. Okay, and this slide, this will give you individual vote center activity. It'll show the number of e-poll books that are at each location, the number of people that have voted. You can see here that at the AMO Community Center, we've had 194 people check in and vote. But right below that, at the Avon United Methodist Church, we've had 2,161 voters check in. So that data is going to be imperative for us. But just so you know, the AMO Community Center only has 3 voting machines, where the Methodist Church has 15. So this is going to help us figure out what locations we need to beef up poll workers and machines, or maybe in some cases combine smaller ones together. This is a good slide. This will show you turnout. Our polls are open 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I believe this slide is a repeat of the other, so I apologize, but it's still pretty cool to look at. And these are, this is a report that's hard to see, but it's produced by the electronic poll book. You can generate oodles and dozens of reports that are very beneficial. And then the fabulous gals in my office, Tammy and Jen, they turn this information into pivot tables. So this is, again, more data that we find very useful. We also can tell, are the voters voting in their own neighborhood, or are they voting on their commute to and from work, or taking their son, daughter to soccer practice? It's all very interesting to look at. An unexpected benefit was from transitioning into electronic poll books was, this isn't my storage closet, I borrowed this off the internet, but this looks like what our storage closet would look like before, just paper and bulk. Before, we would have to physically, each poll book, go through and scan each voter's signature. Now with the electronic poll book, it's done with the push of a button. We went from this to that. That's our entire primary right there. Provisional ballots, very unexpected. Average for this past election, 125 to 150. We had one provisional ballot. Why? Because no one was in the wrong place. Okay, I want to tell you quickly about our poll worker that you all know her. You all have one. She has seen all of these changes in her life. She wasn't ready for this new contraption called an electronic poll book. It's for young people. It'll never work. Through some good training and talking, Dimple tells us now it's the best thing since sliced bread. You all know her, don't you? And then Dimple got her friends to come join us. And whoops. So I just want to say that it's efficient. The budgetary savings to the county, just in printing cost alone, is substantial. And my time is about up then. I just want to say that it's very efficient. There's lots of data there, and thank you all for having me.
Great. Last but not least, Ms. White.
Thank you, Tom. Today I'm going to present a lesson on how to lessen the line on Election Day. This was experienced from the presidential 2016 election. Oops, forgive me. Okay. So next photo. I'm good.
Okay.
Can you? Oh.
I thought you wanted to run it.
No, I'm good. So this is a shot from presidential 2012 in one of our precincts. Unfortunately, in Prince William County, the presidential 2012 election did not go well. And there were lines 3 to 4 hours reported in many places. But I used this photo kind of as proper motivation, if you will, to prepare for 2016. So next, there was a congressional hearing held afterwards to determine what went wrong in the 2012 election. As you can see, the last ballot was recorded at almost 11 o'clock, which was 4 hours after polls closed. Polls close at 7 in Virginia. So next, we took some time to figure out what data we should be looking at. We looked at the demographics of Prince William County. We studied the number of voters who utilize absentee voting and which precincts were the largest. So we were on a mission to fix this problem. So we looked at some other things. Statewide, in 2012, we had 255,000 voters, as you can see there. We went up to 274,000 in 4 years. And at that time, in August of 2016, the state had deployed a online voter registration system. So we were seeing more voters register. So we were getting ready to see a huge uptick in September and October of 2016. Now, as of July, there are 279,000 voters in Prince William County, which means we're going to have to rinse and repeat. And what that means in the election world is we're going to have to reproduce the result we had in 2016 for 2020, but with more voters in the picture. So looking back again at the history of absentee voting in Prince William, we were trying to figure out why voters were not taking advantage of absentee voting. As you can see, it dropped from 2012, from 2008, by about 2,000 voters. So only 10 to 12% were actually taking advantage of absentee voting. So the solution became to inform voters on how to lessen the election day line by voting absentee. Thus, we began a multi-message voter information marketing plan. We were all over the place and very scrappy. It's okay. So the goal became to get 68,000 folks to vote absentee in Prince William County, and that would shift 25% of what we expected to be the turnout to out of the lines on election day. This was an ambitious and lofty goal, but we had to accomplish it for the better overall experience for voters. Next, we looked at commuters, and we discovered that almost 150,000 folks commute out of Prince William County, and commuting or having business outside of Prince William County is a qualifying reason for voters to vote absentee. Let me back up and explain for a minute. In Virginia, you must have a reason to vote absentee, meaning you have to be eligible by certain reasons in order to vote absentee or early in Virginia. So 68,000 voting absentee was about half of the commuting population in Prince William County. So again, we wanted to shift that to absentee. So we set our goal. Then we realized we had to kind of go into myth-busting mode. We realized that voters think they have to qualify or fit a certain criteria to vote absentee, which is a true statement. However, we got the sense that voters didn't know the number of qualifying reasons that would entitle them to vote absentee. So we mailed a voter guide to every household in Prince William County using every door direct mailing with USPS. This is the same method in which you get your Chinese takeout menus. But we got one to every single household, and then within that we included a sample ballot and 6 things that all voters need to take care of before Election Day. Another myth we had to bust was that absentee votes are not counted. So we made it clear in every information piece that we put out there that by law, all absentee votes must be counted. So we had that in every place where we could tuck it. So here's how we focused on getting the message to commuters. We set up electronic boards in all the commuter lots. I think Prince William has 15 to probably about 15 very large commuter lots on 95 and 66 heading into DC. We placed ads in the Commuter Train magazine. We placed ads in HOA magazines where folks were centered and where they were living. And the Virginia Department of Elections also helped us out by placing ads on buses and additional signage in the commuter lots. So the photo's not so hot, but this is what the message board looked like. We also set up a very inexpensive texting program, and basically the message board said text PWC votes to 94253 to get voting updates and reminders. And then wherever we could, we had these banners placed at intersections and other public places where we were allowed to do so. So we really went all out to get the message across. So back to the congressional hearing. Some who testified Monday said pregnant women were forced to stand for hours. So again, this is an indicator that education and information about absentee voting was not getting out there. So then we went on a mission to create some trading cards. And here you go. So we had some fun with it. My team and I are scrappy, and we have a sense of humor, as all election officials must have. But as you see over there, did you know, by law, all absentee votes must be counted. So we made sure that was on every card. I'm going to go through some slides kind of quickly here, but this is what we did. Too old. Some folks took issue with this. Those actually that were younger than the set we were trying to get the message to, and these cards got returned. But the older folks who got it said they also really liked it. So the elderly folks that we were trying to message said they loved the card, but folks in that, say, next tier of age were a little offended. Sorry, Mom. Forgive me. So here's the various ways to commute in Prince William County. First responders can vote absentee, and we made sure that first responders knew they did not have to be on the schedule for Election Day. As long as they are a first responder, they can vote absentee. Active duty military, we also went after. I'm sure you all know the show Quantico. That is in Prince William County. Here's the back of every trading card. So we made it clear, again, what the deadlines were, last day to vote absentee, how to get a hold of us. So we crammed as much information as we could there. So next we did some scrappy little homemade with found items videos, if you will. So we put those all over Facebook, but it was a very inexpensive and cheap way for us to get the message out. So we relied on other voters to get the message out to their buddies and friends. So the next slide, data does not lie. And getting ready for this presentation, I did not realize that VPAP had done a lot of my work for me. So Virginia Public Access Project is a nonpartisan group out of Virginia. And they took data across the state and did some visualizations for me, which I will show you here. So it's hard to see. So I believe in the successful marriage of data analysts and graphic designers, which you've seen plenty of good examples today. Here you can see where Prince William County led the state in early voting or absentee voting for 2016. So we're that very first blue bar right there. So I'm very proud of that. Hope we can continue. Next slide. So here's what absentee voting looked like in 2016. If you go back to 2012, the next slide, you see where the dot moves. So if you, okay, so I like to toggle back and forth, forward, back. See how far we went? Forward, back. Oh, that's 2004. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Thank you. Forgive me. Forgive me. Thank you for helping me. So all that being said, I really love playing with this data for Prince William County because you can really see the shift in what we did to make Election Day work by getting folks to vote absentee. So next slide will be this one. Reasons for early voting in Virginia. Like I said, we studied and we knew that a demographic we needed to target commuters. And apparently we were successful in doing that because the biggest block that voted absentee were work conflict voters. And we had 16,000 ballots cast based on a work conflict. So I also found this data very interesting. So we know our messaging worked, and now we know it's quantifiable, which I like. Again, back in August of 2016, the state launched its online secure portal, which meant that we were taking online voter registrations and folks were able to vote, register to vote through a transaction at the DMV. So we noticed that more and more people were using the portal than to register to vote through the DMV. So we were paying attention to that. Everything that we put out there had the citizen portal information on it. So citizens were able to check their voter record, update their record, confirm their polling place, also apply for an absentee ballot, and see their sample ballot. So we made sure this was published everywhere possible. With our voter information or education, we wanted to make it clear that voters have some responsibilities to address before Election Day. So to know that their voter registration is up, to bring photo ID, what will be on the ballot, what your polling place is. Last two, that you'll be marking your ballot, your vote on a paper ballot, and then you'll be putting it into new scanning equipment. So optical scan was new for Prince William, and we knew we had a lot of cicada voters. As you know, cicada voters are only those that vote in presidential every 4 years. So we had a sense that a number of them did not know that they'd be using new voting equipment and marking information on a ballot. And then finally, we hammered it in again, Election Day, avoid the long line by having a ballot mailed to you. So on Election Day, shaving seconds. My approach was similar to Neil's from Orange County. I knew that there were things we could tweak to make things better. I also paid very much attention to the elbow of death provided by the BPC and MIT. They were partners in helping me getting through presidential 2016. I listened to everything that they gave me, so thank you for that. We looked at our line data collection, and we prepared our precincts to be ready for a line at 6 a.m. We provided those folks with line chaser tablets. So basically, a line chaser tablet took our voter registration list, put it on a tablet that was easy to view. It was not a check-in tablet. And we asked the high school pages to make sure that the voter ID was out before getting to the check-in table. So those were shaving seconds. We provided more officers and laptops in larger precincts. And instead of using a voting permit, we gave the ballot directly to the voter. So we got rid of the second line there. Next slide. We provide a majority of stand-up marking booths. This allows the voter to move more quickly instead of having to sit down and mark the ballot. I'm considering switching to an official felt tip marking pen instead of a standard ballpoint. I think that'll also shave some seconds off. In larger precincts, we put in more equipment. Very simple. And we also implemented a chief headquarters connected to our emergency operations center, and we use radio communications in every single precinct along with my office. So we did it. No voters in line at 7 p.m. in November 2016, and all 91 polling locations closed on time in Prince William County. This is my crew. I'm very proud of my staff. We are a team. We're scrappy. We get along well. We're just a slightly crazy bunch, but in a good way. And finally, that concludes a lesson on how to lessen the line. Thank you. Very nice. Thank you.
I want to thank the panelists because I think that this was an excellent panel, and I learned a lot myself today. How much time do we have for questions? Half an hour. So I'm going to take up half an hour of time asking questions. So, kidding, jokes for those folks at home. I just want to make sure that people are still awake after lunch because I know that I see some heads nodding. But reducing, from me, not from the panelists, reducing wait times. So for Amber and Laura, not trick questions. I see that. Reducing wait times at the polls have been a big focus of the election community since 2012. We heard a lot from Michelle about data collection in Virginia and elsewhere to try to tackle this issue. How are these effects playing out in your counties and states? So.
Sure. Well, for Colorado, and I'm gonna make a request for the audience, just especially based on the wonderful presentation from Prince William, but. Colorado, we mail out a ballot to every voter proactively before every single election, so there's no question. That's their notice. They get their thing. They don't have to give us an excuse. And I was watching the presentation, and I'm like, who doesn't qualify for one of the excuses? Like, I've almost starting to think it's like, well, clearly that's one of those points that just confuses people. And then just the term absentee, I don't know what others think about this, but most people do not know what that means when you say absentee ballot. So I would love to eliminate absentee from terminology altogether with this because I think voters don't necessarily understand it. So that would be a great thing to do somehow long term is strike absentee out of the dictionary. But for us, I mean, because we do mail out ballots, we also have same-day registration, and we have vote centers. So we do have in-person voting options preserved for a 2-week period, and we build up to Election Day and have a certain number of vote centers across the city on Election Day, and you can register and vote right on the spot and there's no deadline, if you will, to register to vote. But what that means is for our vote centers, especially Election Day, and we've now collected this data over a long period of time, we get hit very hard on Election Day in Denver with sort of the lovely people that were too busy for 3 weeks to come in, and they, are there on Election Day, which is totally fine. We just now have the data to expect that. And so we're building up more systems, have adjusted our line management strategy. For this upcoming election, we'll have wait times and all of that available online if there are any. But, we're basically 95+% of our voters use the mail ballot we mailed to them. And they, the feedback that we get by getting your ballot at home is I had time to research and voted at home. I spent a few days talking to friends about what they were going to do. I've heard people say they had wine and cheese parties and talked about, various issues, and then they'd all go off and vote their mail ballot at home. But the interesting thing is, and this is why I call it ballot delivery and sort of voting at home, because it isn't really vote by mail at all, and the main reason is we have now upwards of 85% of our voters that use their mail ballot drop it off in person to one of our drop boxes, our drive-up drop-off, our vote centers, or any of those locations. They're not actually mailing it back. We're seeing less and less people mail it back. So vote by mail is also kind of, for me at least, an outdated term, and really we're just delivering the ballot out. The mechanism is the post office, and then they're still experiencing this in-person voting option by dropping their ballot off. So we've sort of, I think, managed to preserve a really nice experience for the voters that still want that Election Day experience, but they're maybe using that ballot they gave to us. So.
Sure. Regarding lines and electronic poll books, I've personally like to see a little bit of a line because it's showing that people are 4 hours. No. But anyway, that shows that people are getting out there and voting. I don't want them to get too spoiled, but with the electronic poll book, the check-in time is so significantly reduced. It's so fast that if we do get any kind of a clog, it's going to be between the clerk's table where they sign in and the actual voting machine, which we have practices in place to not let that happen. But also on the dashboard that we can see real time on Election Day, we can tell what places are getting hit. So we know, what do we need to do? Do we need to send up backup poll workers? Do we need to send extra workstations, more voting machines? That's how we handle our lines with the electronic poll books.
Okay, great. Ray, thank you for your presentation. I think there's a lot of election officials here today who have misconceptions about organizations like yours gathering data just to sue them, basically. But I think that in listening to your presentation, I thought it was fantastic in that you were saying that how much you work with Pennsylvania and so forth. Are there other misconceptions out there that you would like to dispel from election? You have a room full of election officials, or partially, the things that you would like to dispel from them.
That's an open-ended question.
Yeah. Or common misconceptions.
I think, yeah. I mean, I can't speak to every other state, but what I will say is that the sector that I work in is probably as complicated and full of different kinds of personalities as any of your sectors. And so I think the most common thing that comes up for us, and I think this is applicable to many states like Colorado and Virginia that are considered more battleground states, we tend to have a constant influx of outside influencers who come into the state for a short period of time right before an election to run a voter registration drive or to do some door-to-door campaigning. And they do not have the reasons or the incentives that those of us who are based in a state have to maintain relationships, have a long view. The concept of we're thinking about chess and some people are thinking about checkers. Like they just want to get in and make that quick move. And so I spend half of my time in an election year doing traffic control with those entities and saying things like, it's really not a good idea for you to do the program you want to do in the county that you want to do it. And your attitude toward the people who run elections is really not matching the experience that we have on the ground. Like much of life, relationships are important. And as those of us who work in a particular place dig in over the long run, you get to know people, and you begin to understand that things are the way that they are. And so I think it's not necessarily a misconception, but I don't know. Speaking to election directors, I saw some heads nodding from hearing from some of these folks. There are a lot of things we would like to see and do in our state that we are currently not able to do because of our legislature. It is not because of a lack of will or a lack of interest on the part of the people who are on the ground. And in order to change that, we're all going to have to work together. So I think it's a misconception that I would say for people outside of Pennsylvania, explore who your advocacy community actually is and see if there are more opportunities for collaboration than you might know about.
Great. Michelle, I think that you did a great presentation. One of the things that we've done at the EAC each year is we've had, with our executive director calls Cleary Awards, in that those awards are given to in various categories on things that are innovative and moving forward towards making participation better and making things easier for voters and election officials and giving more information out there overall. I would hope that you submit some of these things for those Cleary Awards when they pop up coming forward. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is how can other counties think of ways, because I'm a Virginia voter and I'm not too old for part of that, but I have to give an excuse every election cycle. It's basically it's the the excuse absentee balloting. So what are there other things that you're thinking about for 2018 and 2020 that folks can use towards making sure that they are able to cast their ballot and so forth?
Well, I'd definitely like to continue voter education, although I've decided to rename that voter information because there is an implication with voter education that you're doing something else that folks who are funding that may or may not like. That being said, I'm just going to try to put more boots on the ground. One program I've thought about would be the absentee advocate program, where I would take officers of election and or folks who are in the community, like Eric's program, who want to go out and let folks know about their options to vote absentee. And it is crazy. There are easily 19 reasons that make folks eligible, but not everybody knows what those are. So I want to continue on the voter information mission. I hope that answers your question.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that does. Laura, I have one more question for you. In terms of the e-poll books, I think that those are fantastic in terms of shutting down long lines and so forth, because in 2012 that was one of the major issues that we heard about. In going towards vote centers, and the same with Colorado, have you noticed that there, if you don't have this, then fine, but have you noticed that there's been an uptick in participation through data, or is there remains the same, or so forth?
Well, this was our first election using electronic poll books, so I don't have anything to compare it to really until we move further forward. However, with that said, the feedback from the poll workers and the voters and the people involved has all been nothing but supportive and positive, that it can only help improve the lines and the efficiencies. So I think I need a couple more under my belt, maybe. So maybe I'll come back in a couple years.
Well, as Amber was
know.
saying,
Yeah.
the first, she participated in the first data summit that we had, and commemorate Commissioner McCormick, because this is basically her idea to have this happen, and we've continued on, and I'm hoping that 2019 we'll have another one and continue on with that. But I'm sorry I interrupted you. So.
No, you didn't.
No.
I'm done.
See, so we have such a polite panel. So with that, I've only taken up 10 minutes of our question and answer period. So if you have questions, we have two folks who have microphones from Pennsylvania who I would say if you can make it brief so we can get as many questions in as possible, that would be great. So we can start right here.
Jerry Fieser from Dauphin County, Pennsylvania. Like Ray was alluding to, we're kind of beholden to what the legislature says that thou shalt do. there's a lot of things we'd like to try and do and like to consider to try and streamline elections, eliminate lines, things like that. How do you transition from precinct-based to vote centers? Do vote centers still provide you the ability to hold precinct-level elections or by ward elections? So like if I'm pulling in a couple municipalities into a high school that are all part of, let's just say, the Middletown area high school, and you got 3 municipalities, can I still, in that vote center, have my Royalton First Ward, Second Ward, Middletown, Lower Swatter type polling places? Are you able to do those things within the vote center?
I got this one.
Yep.
Yes. The beauty of the vote center is the voter can never be in the wrong place. So I, for the first time in 24 years, actually got to vote on election day. I always have to vote early because I'm always working election day and I can't drive back home. So this past primary, because it was a primary and we had delegates and precinct committeemen, it was a large ballot. We had several hundred ballot styles that were loaded on each machine that was deployed out to each of the vote centers. So whether you lived in North Salem, where I do, or the town of Plainfield, or out in the country, your ballot was going to be, no matter where you stopped, your ballot was going to be there. And the beautiful thing that's up and coming for us in the fall is our county, like I mentioned, we're like the second fastest growing in the state right now. So we have annexations happening constantly, where you have this nice little country county out here, and then the town comes in and it wants part of it, but not all of it. So now we have a split precinct, and some voters get the town ballot and others don't. It's so hard to manage. But with the vote center environment, the ballot ticket will dictate which ballot style they get. And coming up this fall, we are getting encoders on the electronic poll books that will automatically load the information on the card that will go straight to the voting machine. So it will virtually, I hate to use that word, but it will remove poll worker error in setting the wrong ballot. Also in Indiana, I wanted to mention our early voting is no excuse. We do have by mail, we have certain criteria, so we have very, very successful early voting. I hope that answered your question. Okay, great.
Yeah, go right ahead.
I was going to add to her answer, if I may.
Please.
Thank you. We're doing the same in Prince William County with our absentee vote centers. We have 3 major absentee vote centers, and they've become the same thing. And I wish we could implement that on election day. We have 91 polling places, and I'd rather manage less polling places on election day. But she's exactly right. All the ballot styles are available wherever the voter decides to show up. One thing we're doing in Prince William is we're using 2 sets of EPBs. So when the voter first shows up, and this is just in our absentee vote centers, not on election day, folks are checked in on one set of EPBs, and they're given the application to sign and indicate what reason they need to vote absentee. Then they take that to a second set of EPBs, which has a ballot programmed into it based on their split. So we have split precincts as well. And some elections we've had easily 43 ballot styles to keep up with. So ballot on demand tied to our EPBs ensures that the right ballot is printed right there on the spot, which also allows us to save money in pre-printing ballots. So we run ballot on demand with an EPB system in our absentee vote centers. So it's very possible to do what you're trying to do.
Is there a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, because we've done vote centers in Colorado for a long period of time. In fact, they started there in Larimer County back in, I think, 2004 or 5. And so we've done, and then in Denver, we've done vote centers for early voting prior to us now having this new ballot delivery system. So it was just sort of, it kept just transferring basically everything to vote centers. And vote centers does have an impact on turnout. You're not left out or voting a provisional because you show up at the wrong place. But it isn't just the vote center for that turnout increase. For us, same-day registration was a big driver of that. And if you just look at the top states for turnout, all 6 of them have same-day registration. So there's definitely a correlation to making registration easier overall, combined with vote centers and other, whether it's ballot delivery or other policies that help with that. So.
Any question from this side?
My name is Sheila Laney. I live in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Two things. The one thing about the long lines, it really depends on if you're trying to contract the electorate or you're trying to expand the electorate. And I mean, I know there are processes, but sometimes it has to do with intent. For Erin, I think it is, my question for you is, I know that we're all here talking about data and being data-driven, but as a community person, it is what's the face-to-face interaction that is most important about driving people to the polls. Could you talk a little bit about that?
You mean Amber?
No, I'm sorry, the gentleman next to
Oh,
me.
Ray, Ray.
I'm sorry, I said his name wrong. I'm
No,
sorry.
it's fine.
What is your name again? I'm
Ray
sorry.
Murphy.
Ray, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's substantial research at this point on what are the most effective things to increase voter turnout. And there's kind of 3 ways that I think about it. There's a significant aspect of voter turnout that can be increased by efficiencies in the way that elections themselves are administered. Most of those have to do, frankly, with the law, the way that the election process is structured. The more that you offer convenient and accessible options to voters, you do see some increase in turnout. It doesn't in any way, though, make up for the huge turnout gaps that we see across the country. And those get into sort of the other aspect, which is that face-to-face interactions between potential voters and trusted messengers are the absolute most effective way to increase turnout. They're also the most costly and difficult to do because a face-to-face interaction is fundamentally more complicated than a phone call or a mail piece or a text. I think there's a third component, which is, I think a bigger philosophical question for all of us, which is, what would it take for every person in our democracy to feel like participating in an election is something that they should expend time doing? And I don't want to get into that philosophical conversation right now, but I think this notion of shaving seconds on election day is a concept that could be applied to the whole enchilada. There are a lot of ways that elections are administered that create unnecessary barriers to participation. Again, though, my experience is there has not been enough political will at a big picture level to make sure that those changes can be implemented fairly by the actual election administrators who are on the job. And often what you see is sort of a, and I think you see that on this panel, there's some people who are really going above and beyond to be excellent, and that's great, but everyone should have the resources in administering elections to do what they can to shave seconds in the bigger picture.
I guess on this side, 1 question per. No, I'm teasing.
Hi, this question is for Mr. Murphy. My name's Athan Koutsarumbas from Bucks County. From the day that your organization decided that it would implement the third-party API with the Pennsylvania Department of State, how long did that process take for the development and implementation? And then what were some of the lessons learned as the application was rolled out with actual voters and your grassroots activists?
And this is maybe a process question. I know Mike Moser is talking about this Pennsylvania Web API. Did you already talk about it, Mike? Yeah. Okay, well, so Mike is really a resource as well, and the team at the Department of State. But from my memory, it was a relatively quick development process. The Department of State rolled out online voter registration in August of 2015, and development had kind of maybe begun in that spring. It was the advocacy community that initially said, if you're looking for cost savings from online voter registration and you want the maximum number of participants, most third-party voter registration efforts will not use an online portal because it is considered a best practice in third-party voter registration to retain the information of the voter to then remind them to vote on election day. And that was sort of laid out to the Department of State, and I think, their leadership was incredibly visionary in understanding that that was a true statement, and the goal was, in fact, to go as paperless as possible. And so creating an online web portal where third parties could push some of that data in directly to the Department of State would really save time. I would defer to DOS, but I would say in the grand scheme of the DOS budget, it was not a significant amount of dollars that was spent on the coding of that system. Some of that has to do with the way that the Pennsylvania shore system is established, and so I wouldn't presume to speak about whether other states could as easily modify their online database to accept those data sets. What has been exciting as time has gone on is that the concept of connecting a third-party database to the voter registration system is not limited to third parties. And so there are many state agencies, particularly, where it really makes sense to connect these things because you can drive a large volume of voter registration applications for new voters or change through a completely electronic process. And from a county perspective, what that means is there's no data entry. It's more or less clicking an approval or a disapproval of the application for all the typical reasons. And it just saves a lot of time, money, and effort on a lot of people's parts. I hope that more states will replicate what the Pennsylvania Department of State has done, because it's I think it's also worth pointing out, with no offense to anyone involved, that the technology that was implemented is actually quite standard in most of the rest of the commercial world and has been in place for 10 or 20 years. And so we're always we're always running a little behind in government in terms of catching up with tech trends. But the idea of sharing this kind of data is quite simple to do and has so many benefits.
I'm getting the wrap-up symbol, even though my time says 22. Then it's not wrap up. So, question on this side? No? Then we'll go back to you right here.
On the idea of early vote centers and things like that, I mean, how, in Pennsylvania, if you vote by absentee, you can then change your mind, go to the polls on election day, and they will physically mark void on that ballot. It's not open, it's not counted, and you get to vote your new choice on the polls. In your early vote centers, you're talking about voting on machines and stuff like that. How do you unring that bell if a voter changes their mind before election day?
So it's my understanding that that's actually fairly a unique process that you have going on in Pennsylvania. You can't pull your ballot back once you've submitted. In fact, we start processing 3 weeks out, and then even when we had early voting, early voting was on equipment. So like once you're cast, you're done. And the only way that you would then be able to go back in is if you voted on a provisional, which then would not be counted. But there's no sort of rolling back of once you submit.
So you really have to know who you want to vote for.
Yeah, I mean, and Colorado's a swing state, so that honestly hasn't been, I mean, you've got to know. And I think in most states, ringing it back or any of that is not something that occurs. So, yeah, you gotta pick.
Have a lot of them change their mind in 16.
Oh.
I think we have time for one last question. And if no one's going to ask, come on, this is your opportunity to get a question in. But if not, I will finish with my question. No one? All right. People are walking out, too. We talked today about mail ballot tracking systems, electronic poll books, line management tools, and enhanced voter files. None of these tools existed, at least in this current form, when the EAC was formed 16 years ago. What can we at the EAC do to keep encouraging this innovation in this space? And what types of data-driven practices and tools do you think we'll be talking about in the near future? If each of you want to answer within a minute or so, or
I can, yeah, I'll get it done. So what I talked about, the encoders, I know they've been out there a while, but I think that's something we're all going to see. And then one misconception that a lot of people, mostly candidates, have about electronic poll books, it has nothing to do with the question that you asked, is that they're going to get results in faster. They just think, oh, we're going to get numbers quicker. No. So just throwing that out there.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, from my perspective, I mean, our entire approach in Denver has been analyzing the data we have, but also continuous improvement. And so elections are very much people, process, and then sort of this concept of continuous improvement. And you can only do continuous improvement. You can only continue to get better if you're curious about what is happening currently in your jurisdiction, how to analyze that data, and then build systems that better support the voters. For me, I think doing what's right by way of the voters as sort of the first premise and step is the right approach in elections, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of where they sit. Everyone deserves sort of this fair, equitable process across the board that's consistent. So any of these like inconsistencies that exist, and you know, I mean, the sort of absentee with excuses and all of these sorts of things, I mean, the confusion that creates for people that do this once a year, if that, maybe once every 4 years, is sort of, I guess in my mind, you know, I think, and I would say disrespectful, frankly, to the voting franchise, because this is our world, but it's certainly not something that they do. And so I'm a big advocate of being curious and creative about solving the greatest challenges we have in elections, and that's where I think everyone up here has provided different examples of improvements. And so to me, I think the Election Assistance Commission continuing to highlight the best practices and the good things and having events like this to just facilitate the conversation is really how we kind of all, as a collective, get better.
Thank you. Yeah. So with that, I want to thank the panelists. I think this was an excellent, excellent panel. We'll now break for about 15 minutes and just come back at about 3:15 for our last panel of the day, which will focus on the post-election period. All right, and I want to thank my panelists again today. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, nice to meet you. I was reading this, I spoke to State Voices.